delighted that we are part and parcel of we have been given this chance to present our findings with regards to the review of the implementation of the Farmer Input Support Program, FISP, a program that is very critical for the country, and at a time when the country has to make changes with regards to our agricultural sector to improve its productivity, especially with the pronouncements made by the Minister of Finance with regards to the comprehensive agricultural program. So just a brief background, we understand that smallholder farms are the main source of livelihoods for about 70% of our Zambian population. We, however, note that the productivity of these farms is generally low, threatening household income and food security. I think to that effect, some time back, the Zambian government, under the Poverty Reduction Strategy paper, introduced the Farmer Input Subsidy Program, also known as, that time, the Fertilizer Input Subsidy Program, in the year 2002. This program has undergone tremendous transformation measures since its inception, and from the fertilizer credit program to the fertilizer support program, FSP, in 2002-2003 season, and amended to Farmer Input Support Program in 2009-2010 farming season, respectively. In terms of the adequacy of the policy and the legal framework governing the Farmer Input Support Program, so this program does not really have a specific legal governing framework per se, but it is actually implemented through the Ministry of Agriculture, following the guidelines that are enshrined within the manual. And these guidelines are basically reviewed from time to time. It is therefore paramount that there is need to ensure that a legal framework is created to that effect. So in terms of its implementation or its governance, we realize that the Ministry of Agriculture is critical in terms of the provision of technical aspects as well as the implementation. Then we have the Ministry of Finance, who actually provide the funds for its implementation. Then we have the e-governance division through Smart Zambia that actually provide the database where our farmers are actually kept through the system that we call the Ziamis program. So in terms of the way the structure is, we realize that FISP is at national level. We have national level structures where we have the FISP coordinator seated at the Ministry of Agriculture. And then at provincial level, we have the agricultural coordinator who coordinates various activities of the program in terms of implementation at district for depots. Then at district level, the district agriculture coordinators collaborates together with the PACO and the FISP secretariat to provide key oversight to the main activities. That is ensuring that the blocks and the camp levels actually are well captured. In terms of the impact, what has been the impact of the FISP on the small-scale farmers? So with this, we basically looked at it from the empirical evidence, where we looked at studies that have been conducted in within this scope. And study number one, which looked at, do input subsidy program raise income and reduce poverty among smallholder farm households? Evidence from Zambia, which was done by Mason and Tembo in 2015. From this study, we could actually see that FISP raises income and reduces severity of poverty. The program has, however, no statistical significant effect on poverty incidences among smallholder farm farm households in Zambia. So what this simply means is that yes, there is that impact, but that impact is not statistically significant to be galvanized to say yes, the impact is quite immense. Then the second study, which was done by Funsan and other authors with regards to the farmer input support program and household income, the lessons learned from Zambia, Southern Province, we actually saw that this study concluded that the per capita increment resulting from FISP is still not large enough to lift the households above the poverty line. So this basically tells us that we still need to do many other changes in order for it to make some serious impact. Another study for 2016 also, where it looked at the effectiveness of FISP in promoting household food security. A case from Chiawa, Kafiwa district. Here we also conclude, or the investigations revealed that the FISP pack can be improved to promote household food security. It gives us lessons to say that there is still room for us to improve this program in order for it to provide meaningful food security. Another policy brief done by Dr. Elias Kuntashula in 2021 regarding the impact of farmer input support policy on agricultural production, diversity, and dietary diversity in Zambia. Basically also now shows that the effect of production diversity did not lead to increase in household dietary diversity. Actually, on this aspect, we are merely trying to see if farmers can be able to build resiliency in terms of their crop production. We should be able to talk about crop diversification in the sense that the climate is evolving. So we need to ensure that even in this program, crop diversification is taken into effect to ensure that the diets as well as resilience is built with regards to climate. The last study basically also tells us that the increase in income diversification was reported during the e-voucher implementation period amongst the FISP e-voucher beneficiaries at household level. Whilst we know that the FISP program is implemented at two levels, we have direct FISP, DIS, which is direct input supply, and we have the e-voucher system. Now, even as there is so much debate with regards to this system, we realize that e-voucher, if well implemented, has serious capacity to raise household incomes as well as increase productivity amongst the small-scale farmers. Mark my word, I'm saying if well implemented, if we are able to see many of the leakages within the system. Now, in terms of measures that have been put in place that only deserving farmers benefit from the FISP program, we date back to 2011, when the Ministry of Agriculture was called the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperative by then, because this program was mainly by then conducted under Department of Agribusiness as well as the Department of Cooperatives. Some of the criteria that were set were that farmers must be a member of a registered farmer organization or cooperative that has been active in at least 1 year of their registration and is not organized based on partisan, family business, or private partnership. The farmer must also be registered as a small-scale farmer and actively involved in farming in a camp coverage area. The farmer must cultivate up to a maximum of 5 hectares, and as well as the farmer must be able, at that time, be able to raise at least 100 kwacha per 50 kg bag, or contribute 2 by 50 kg bag of white maize in terms of contribution. Then the farmer must not concurrently be benefiting from the food security pack. The food security pack, which is basically operating under the Ministry of Community Development, because this one FISP looks at viable farmers, whilst the other one looks at the most vulnerable farmers or most vulnerable communities. Then the farmer must not be a defaulter from the FRA or any other agricultural credit program. However, as indicated, this program has been evolving, and since the introduction of the e-voucher, the targeting as well as some of the leakages that have been in the program has been improving somehow. In terms of private sector involvement in the Farmer Input Support Program, so we acknowledge that the implementation of FISP since 2002-2003 farming season has required the interaction of different stakeholders such as government, development partners, and the private sector. So some of the benefits of private sector involvement, first of all, it is believed that activities can mostly be efficiently done if we involve the private sector. Secondly, the involvement of the private sector also is critical in developing private sector market-led systems, especially in remote areas where we talk about marketing and agribusiness, developing the marketing and the agribusiness systems. Thirdly, we also look at the involvement of the private sector by government allows government to ensure that they use their resources in an efficient manner by reducing the cost of subsidy to the program. And we also see that private sector in input retailing reduces the displacement of commercial sales by subsidized inputs. Then the private sector will also stimulate the job creation with a well-developed agro-dealer network. This, if the agro-dealer network is well followed along all the chains of agricultural production line, we realize that if well followed, this can create and stimulate employment creation, provided we ensure that we involve well-organized businesses that are formalized, and not just formalized at the point when they want to supply and at some point run away. Of course, within this aspect, we realize that there are also some challenges in terms of how government may look at the private sector, as well as how the private sector may look at the government. So we realize that in terms of challenges, we realize that there are basically issues of vested interest and non-compliance, especially from sometimes when we look at the e-voucher program, which has attracted new entrants, where there are some fertilizer businesses, particularly domestic companies, who just basically form businesses for the sake of ensuring that they benefit from the program, and not really that these are sustainable businesses. Then we also see that another aspect in terms of challenges, inefficient payment system. So we realize that there is evidence that payment system by government for suppliers and services rendered to FISP by private sector is inefficient. Whilst we want these systems to be efficient, we need a win-win situation where government is going to pay the suppliers on time, and the supplier should also be monitored to supply the inputs to the right farmers on time. And this is quite critical to delivering a very productive agricultural sector. And going forward, when we talk about the comprehensive agricultural program, we need efficiency, even as we talk about inclusion of other programs that support the comprehensive or inclusivity in the agricultural sector. In terms of opportunity, also, this gives more involvement in terms of the private sector. I think we see that this leads to quite more participation. Then we also see that there is efficiency in terms of when the private sector comes into play, provided we need to ensure that there is coherence and we monitor each other in terms of what we do. Then we also see that the private sector investment in rural markets, it's not always that that government will be able to take development in these rural areas. We are now talking about private sector-led development, and to do that, we need to encourage many private sector investment in rural areas that can stimulate jobs, that can foster growth in the sector.
So following its commitment to increase agricultural diversification, in 2015 the government commenced a transition from FISP to the e-voucher, and this allowed the farmers to select the agricultural inputs of their choice. This was an important strategy introduced to improve FISP and also to promote sustainable agricultural diversification. Linked to this, in the 2018-19 farming season, cardless redeeming was introduced to improve efficiency and effectiveness in the transfer of funds to beneficiaries under the program. And then a further strategy to improve FISP was to expand the range of crops included in the program. So rice was added in the 2010-11 farming season, while sorghum, cotton, and groundnuts were added in the 2012-2013 season as part of the government's push for crop diversification. And then if you look at page 11, we've listed some of the challenges that have been faced in the implementation of this. There are quite a number that are listed, so I'll just highlight a few of them. There have been delays in government funding and delays in input distribution. Certain banks that were engaged by government to implement the e-voucher did not have a physical presence in some districts, and this made transacting difficult. There was also poor targeting of farmers, so there have been challenges in identifying beneficiary farmers, and in some cases counterfeit cooperatives have been formed for the sole purpose of accessing inputs. In other cases, beneficiaries use multiple names to obtain more inputs. And there have also been a limited number of participants who have graduated from the program, and as a result, dependency syndrome has developed, where farmers expect to receive inputs season after season. And in the last place, traditional FISP was not increasing agricultural diversification away from maize.
Having seen that we are now trying to develop the comprehensive agricultural program, it's important that a number of things as we migrate, they need to be taken into account. So one of the recommendations is that there is need to reduce system leakage by improving the monitoring and evaluation of FISP and crowding in the private sector involvement by implementing the program through e-voucher redeemable at agro-dealer and input supplier that could further increase the impact of FISP in total input use and potentially create more jobs in the process. However, we must be able now to mark here that the agro-dealership that is involved in the e-voucher ought to be monitored. There must be a system to monitor the agro-dealers, because some of the agro-dealers are actually, like I mentioned, formed just prior to the agricultural season, and they do not have capacity to supply the inputs. You may be able to note that in the previous time, in the previous seasons where e-voucher was actually implemented, you realize that there were a number of agro dealers that did not have inputs, but farmers were encouraged to redeem money. Now, when you link the agro dealers to the main supplier and they are monitored, we know that they will basically be able to have inputs. So that mechanism needs to be there, because at the end of the day, we might do right targeting, but at the end of the day, you realize that few farmers are actually implementing agricultural activities. Others have taken up money in terms of in form of inputs. So that actually hinders the issue of increasing crop productivity. Then also evidence shows that FISP is disproportionately targeted to households that cultivate more land and are more likely to be above the poverty line. there is need to review the targeting mechanism to take into account socio-economic characteristics of FISP and the food security pact. We must be able to distinguish between these two programs. A number of farmers currently participating in FISP, you realize that some of them must be on the food security pact, and in the process, this makes it very difficult for someone who is not viable to graduate from a program. The other aspect also is that the technocrats ought to be involved in the program design, review, and implementation. Another important aspect in terms of the weaknesses that, which we have seen, is that e-voucher or direct input supply has not set productivity indices for tracking progress on improvement of yield, area planted, as well as crops cultivated per farmer over time. Because what indicators are we going to use to see whether this farmer is improving over time? So this is quite important to facilitate the result-based monitoring and evaluation under this program. Another aspect also is that Secretariat is highly centralized. When there are problems, in most cases you find that the whole team from Lusaka has to travel to go and sort out a problem at maybe district level or so. So we need to ensure that, if possible, this program should have a provincial coordinator other than the provincial agricultural coordinator. Instead, because during that period during the agricultural season, PACOs also have other things, so they will not attend to these matters fully, as the way the FISP coordinator may attend to these matters at the national level. Then the other aspect also is that we need to ensure that the revamped FISP should be able to offer a diversified range of products and give farmers much more flexibility in terms of what inputs they can be able to manage. I think this is all about the issue we have been talking about. We've been talking about crop diversification away from maize and so on and so forth. But we know that e-voucher actually provides an avenue to diversify away from maize. And even in the comprehensive agricultural program, even when you talk about integrating irrigation into the new program, integrating more climate resilient technologies and so on, we need to ensure that for crop diversification to be achieved, all these measures we are talking about ought to be done. In terms of the policy framework, also there is need to aid the implementation of both DIS and e-voucher as indicated in the 2021 implementation manuals. However, FISP is not backed by any legal framework. I think that is why you find that it is even difficulty. I think if you look at the people from the financial management side, we have the Financial Management Act, which guides how resources should be used prudently in the public sector. But we also need to have a framework or a legal document guiding how the implementation must be done and measures to be taken in case of anything. Then we also advocate that to make e-voucher more efficient as we migrate in terms of farmer redeeming the right inputs, government should consider engaging large-scale dealership that can subcontract reliable agro-dealers to stimulate private sector involvement. This is quite critical. For instance, we have been having issues to do with a supplier failing to supply fertilizer, or a supplier supplies fertilizer which is substandard, or a supplier supplies seed that does not meet the required criteria for a particular agroecology. What is required is that we need to ensure that the right suppliers are actually linked the producers or the right suppliers are actually linked to the main supplier, so that we see the capacity to avoid some of these problems that the program has been facing. And then I will not mention nearly everything, but lastly, we should also consider, yes, we are in economic times, but we should also consider that the contribution that these farmers have been making, amounting to 400 kwacha, probably should be increased to double to ensure that vulnerable farmers can be tackled by the other category. Because if we are saying this program is meant for viable farmers that can be run through the program, migrate, and become serious or serious emerging farmers, then the most vulnerable may probably not be able to fit in this category, because it's like we will continue subsidizing and these farmers will be producing the same area, same crops, and there will be lack of innovative measures. And then finally also, we also realize that, this is an off-guard, we also realize that, yes, whilst we acknowledge that FISP is an important program, we should also acknowledge that there are programs within the Ministry of Agriculture that require serious attention, linked to the productivity of the same crops and other agricultural activities farmers are engaged in. For example, we need to ensure that we balance the scale in terms of resource allocation with regards to issues of modernizing our extension services. Other than that, our R&D, our research and development. For example, it will be very difficult for us to talk about more innovations that are actually up to standard now in terms of technologies. If you go to Zambia Agricultural Research Institute now, they will tell you that they are not capable to produce maybe climate smart related products in terms of seed and so on, because they are poor funded. Okay, but I think with the goodwill that we have, with the goodwill that we are seeing towards R&D or science and technology, we could probably ensure that these other sectors will leverage the resources and ensure that R&D also responds to some of these challenges, because it is from research and development that we are going to develop innovative technologies, irrigation, water harvesting technologies, to ensure that we are able to operate optimally and have an inclusive agricultural agenda that will increase agricultural productivity. I rest my case here.
But then I've got two questions. The first question is on the involvement of technocrats. In your presentation, you clearly point out that there is need to involve technocrats. But from what we have seen, technocrats actually also have proved to be a hindrance in as far as FISP implementation is concerned. I'm talking about people at the district level, and maybe even at national level and provincial level, who have taken advantage of the loopholes that are in FISP to enrich themselves. They form cooperatives, and then inputs are given to those cooperatives, they get the inputs, and then they sell. Others even go to the extent of paying for farmers, and then they get the inputs. Like you clearly pointed out, the amount that is requested for is more a bit on the lower side, and they're able to provide resources to that extent. So what will be your take on that? Then how do technocrats really be of use or help when we have such kind of issues coming up? The last one is, should we leave FISP to be managed by the private sector, while government plays a reduced role of extension service provision, policy, and the legal framework? What is your take on that?
In which we can curb those challenges that we experience right now. And also, I think there's also a dilemma of having a policy in place, because the policy also outline the procedures as well as practices and also limitations as to how to go about that. But with lack of those two important frameworks, it's actually very difficult to curb such. And we've seen it ongoing on how most of some technocrats are also, can say, abusing the FISP in that term. But we are looking at it to the fact that if we do have a legal framework, that would actually also help and also give powers. We can also have power prosecution and other ways on how we can go about such culprits.
It's very critical that a legal framework, the ministry should begin looking at if we are to go with FISP, we are in dire need of a legal framework. In terms of leaving FISP either in the hands of private sector, whilst government plays an endemic role. Honorable Member, whilst we know that the private sector has got the finances, the muscle, and so on to drive the agenda, the idea is that we are also trying to protect the interest of the farmers, the small-scale farmers, because definitely this is where our main food basket is centered. Our commercial farmers basically are export-oriented. So we still need government intervention at some level, even as we are saying private sector or private-led agricultural interventions will be required. So still, government will be required to provide an oversight in terms of how this program will be implemented. Because leaving the private sector completely, the direction of the private sector at times and the direction of government, sometimes these are parallel. Whilst the other one probably might, there's an aspect of profit making, and at the same time, if we do not control them, they might end up making our farmers much more prone to vulnerability. So we need to put mechanisms to synergize these things around.
Just wanted to find out what benefit did you discover to the farmers who use FISP. Have you observed any of the farmers to having graduated probably from the level where the FISP found him to another level? The other question is that have you conducted any survey to ascertain if farmers are happy with the e-voucher, or this e-voucher merely benefited more of the agro-dealer than the farmers themselves? Thank you.
Which one have you seen that it has performed better on the ground, and not what is good on paper? So far, what farmers are interested to continue. Thank you.
I think this is one of the challenges that we've outlined in our submission, and also the reason why we've also said that there is need to increase the contribution per farmer so that we can remove the vulnerable farmers from the FISP to go on the food security path. So that is a challenge that we have with regards to targeting of people that are supposed to be on the FISP. You'll find that there's someone who's on FISP who doesn't qualify. And when we're looking at who doesn't qualify, the aim of the FISP is to increase productivity as also to increase income for farmers. But you'd see that there are not viable farmers or vulnerable farmers that are on the FISP, and it's the time of production is mostly for consumption as opposed to maybe also having some of the products going on the market. So it's difficult for farmers to graduate. So that's the challenge that we have, and I think we also lack disaggregated data. Most of the times when we're reporting in terms of yields, we aggregate all farmers as opposed to just having people that are on FISP and also just all other farmers. So it's quite difficult to have such information to see if really the people that are graduating. Hence the need for us to also put in policies which will also guide the procedures on how we can target and also how we can identify how farmers can graduate. So we also need to put in place indicators, key performance indicators for farmers that are on the FISP. And by doing that, I think it will be very easy for us to actually aggregate the data and actually get the kind of information that we need. Because we have farmers that would equally graduate from the FISP, but are still on the FISP because of that dependency nature, where you're getting some inputs at a lower cost. So they would not, although actually opt not to graduate from the program because they're benefiting. So we just have to put in place procedures and practices that will help improve the FISP and also ensure that we have people that are graduating. And maybe just for the second question, Honorable, maybe you could repeat the second question. I didn't quite get the second one.
I was trying to find out if you have conducted any survey to ascertain if the farmers are happy with the e-voucher, because most of the farmers are complaining that this e-voucher system has more like benefited the agro dealers than themselves as farmers. And if you have seen even on your own, you would have seen that there is an upswing of the agro dealers, and most of the farmers, as I speak to you, they are busy complaining that they haven't received the swiped inputs for 2020, even for 2021 season. So meaning that most of these agro dealers were mainly benefiting from the farmers. Thank you.
Also looking at the advantages of the e-vouchers compared to the direct input supply, and we did that project in 2018 to 2019, and unfortunately our objectives didn't really go into saying if we could actually address the challenges that the farmers have. And I think also as an institution, if we could have, we're sure we can just try and call for proposals or maybe even partnerships, because such a survey would require a lot of resources and also a large scope. And I think it's very pertinent that we should look into that. And even as we're planning for our year, we can actually look into that and provide the honorable members with regards to the farmer's opinion. But what we have is empirical evidence looking at the e-voucher, the benefits of the e-voucher based on best practices from other sub-Saharan countries as opposed to the actual voice of the farmers. I think that we overlooked as an institution, and we'll actually try and put it in for our research focus for this year.
Quite a very crucial issue. The e-voucher looks to be attractive empirically when it has been implemented according to the way the program is designed. And when all these loopholes that we are mentioning, that even other honorable members are mentioning, are sealed, it has benefits both to the farmer and both to government in terms of saving resources. However, currently, when systems are not in place, DIS is the best, because we know that of the 1 million, maybe 1,023 farmers that have been targeted probably during this farming season, we know that if we give a supplier what they'll get easy, we are sure that they'll get fertilizer and seed. As opposed to what we were talking about, because in terms of the real practice on the ground, e-voucher actually attracted a lot of malpractice in terms of agro dealers conniving with the farmers, either to withdraw cash, or the agro dealers not having capacity to supply, and hence, honorable members, you realize that in areas, yes, there could have been all these complaints. In areas where e-voucher was being piloted, there were quite a number of these incidences happening. And whilst where DIS was happening, a number of farmers actually got the inputs and yeah. But we also need to be cognizant that in DIS we are basically giving a farmer fertilizer and the maize seed. That is what is there. Except in probably in other areas where they said we need also to be providing legumes, looking at the agroecologies in terms of how they relate, where you realize that Now, in terms of diversification, it becomes difficult under DIS to diversify. Unless if we are to go that route, we need to pump in enough resources to scale up the number of crop species to give out, not just maize, but we should be able to give at most. If, for example, in Southern Province, we know what is critical in Southern Province. People will require maize, but they will also require other legumes like cowpea, but they will not require beans and so on. And we know there are other areas where beans will be required. So the idea is to ensure that people diversify in terms of what they grow, and that should be able to build their resilience. That way, the objective of FISP, which is increasing increasing incomes at household level, as well as making them self-sufficient, can be attained. Because imagine now that we are having all these calamities. There are certain areas that did not have enough rains. Now we have other areas having too much rains. One of the issues is that there are other areas where certain crops can do well, and other areas where some of these crops may not do well. So we need to have, this program must have a strategy of mapping out areas with crop specifications where these can be, where such parks could be well upscaled.